Welcome back to the Politbureau. The IEC is was back at the Constitutional Court on Wednesday. It has missed a 2-year-long deadline to ensure that the voters' roll has the addresses of all 21 million registered voters. Now it wants the unconstitutionality of that voters' roll again suspended until November next year. At least two parties are opposing the extension and have come up with alternatives to remedy the defect. In studio, we are joined by the DA's Chief Electoral Representative at the IEC, Mike Memoriat, and from our Durban studios, the IFP's legal advisor, MPL Lawrence de Klerk, and as we've indicated before, that Mondli Makanya, the City Press's editor-in-chief, is also here. Let's take a listen to the explanation from the IEC's Vice Chairperson, Terry Tsilane, about why they need this extension.
You look, for instance, in terms of the numbers that we're able to get during the registration of the 10th and 11th of March, we managed to get about 1.6 million people as addresses. We believe that following the Constitutional Court judgment in Mhlope as well as in Kameta, that the obligation on the Commission to have the addresses is real, and we've got to try to get the addresses for every person. And if we don't have the addresses for some of the people, we believe that there will be a vulnerability on the part of the organization, and we're trying to deal with that particular aspect.
Mike, the DA is saying extend, but not until November 2019.
Yes, look, we're very much aware that practically we can't force people to, or the IEC, to suddenly get the people's addresses overnight. So they need some time.
But it's not overnight, it's been like 2 years, eh?
No, it has been 2 years, but as you've heard, 75% of the roll has addresses, 25% not. They need to get those other 25%, but it isn't going to happen in 5 minutes, so they need some time. But the problem is that we have the election, and the election could turn in certain provinces on a few thousand votes. And so that's our argument, that they've had this time, as you've said, and that they should have been able to make far more progress than they have. I think there were other means that they had available, like the use of an outbound call center. Just call voters that you don't have their addresses and ask them, what is your address? They neglected to employ that. They cite lack of funds. Well, they should have lobbied for more funds.
And you are saying that at least by March, extend the deadline at least by March. What happens if they don't have all the voters on all the addresses of all the voters by March, considering as well that they've had 2 years to do this?
Yes. Well, look, I think that the Constitutional Court is going to have to decide what happens. We await the judgment. It's been reserved. But we expect that they will say to the IEC, you have now until March, but you better really do all of the necessary to get it right by March. I think that's what they're going to do.
Okay, Lawrence de Klerk is joining us from our Durban studio. He is the representative of the IFP, a legal advisor to the IFP as well, and a member of the provincial legislature. Lawrence, the IFP has also come up with an alternative, but the IFP is saying that actually what people should do is on the day of the vote, that they should come with their addresses and show where they live as an alternative.
Yes, that's 100% correct. We must understand that the voters' roll is the cornerstone of the elective process. And if there's any problem with that voters' roll, it might have a negative impact. The Electoral Commission was given 2 years to fix the problem, and remember, the original sin was a massive failure by the Electoral Commission to obtain the addresses. They have done well up till now. There's basically only 18% of voters without proper addresses, where it was about 66% 2 years ago. The problem is that the relief that the Electoral Commission asked would in effect have the result that the Electoral Commission would have been shielded for any attack on this problem of the voters' roll. And that was firstly our main problem, that they could not have a blanket protection from any challenge. And secondly, we went to court and explained to the court, and I'm sure the court will accept this because the Electoral Commission themselves considered that it is a progressive idea, and that is to fix the problem by when people on the day want to vote and there is no address, that address should be given, and after that
Lawrence,
can
here's
vote.
the problem with what I think the IFP is proposing, because the legislation says that the voters' roll must have the addresses of all voters, and even in the Constitutional Court ruling in 2016, the Constitutional Court said that even people who are campaigning would need to know where these voters are and would need to know who they are campaigning, who are they campaigning to win over. But if people come with their addresses only on Voters' Day, that means that, in effect, the voters' roll still remains unconstitutional.
You are correct on that basis, but what you are arguing is that those without addresses should be unable to vote, and those people should be excluded. We as the IFP feel that that is unacceptable, and that the best other option is the one that we put forward. So although there might be merit in what you say, the result of that will be untenable.
Mondli, what's your take on this, considering, of course, that the IEC has had the 2 years, and Mike, I'll need your take on this as well. Who is holding the IEC accountable?
You know what, I'm very sympathetic to the IEC on this one. I mean, like, the IEC is also a victim, IEC and the voters' roll. It can be like a hostage to migration patterns, uncontrolled and uncontrollable migration patterns in this country, and basically a rapid pace of urbanization that's resulted in informal settlements where addresses are very difficult to ascertain and to create, and also basically where it's difficult for proper spatial planning. So, and these patterns are constantly changing. So even though it was in 2016, it's not that easy, and I know that it's difficult.
Yeah.
I know, I mean, like, an innovation that has been proposed is that sometimes you just approximate where people live. Like, Mike lives opposite the nursery school, and Mondli.
Yes. That's one of the that's one of the alternatives that even the IEC itself has come up with. But it's not difficult to locate people, because it almost seems as though what the IEC is struggling with is how to locate the people. How is it possible? And this was something that even the Chief Justice mentioned during the 2016 case. How is it possible for census to get a hold of people and get their addresses and get where they live? And the IEC cannot do that. The Chief Justice even made an example, and he said one of the retail stores are able to call him and like, hey, where do you live now? Why can't the IEC do the same thing? Mike, you guys have come up with a similar proposal saying that let's set up a call center and get these people's addresses.
No, absolutely. You know, the mechanisms have been created so that even in places where the addresses are a bit beyond the normal particularity that you would normally get, that they can provide for that. But I want to take you up on your question to Lawrence. The problem with getting the addresses on the day, and this is provided for, it's happening in by-elections currently, is that on a general election day, there are masses and masses of people. You're going to have difficulty keeping up with logistics just conducting an election. Now you impose over and above on this an additional function, it's going to go pear-shaped very quickly. It really is incumbent on the IEC to pull out all the stops, to do everything between now and March, to do, as you've said, enable the parties to campaign, and then also to ensure that there's no electoral fraud taking place.
And that's the issue, Mondli. It is electoral fraud, because the concern has been people being bused to various voting stations. And as Mike had said earlier on as well, that this election will be so tightly contested that a mere 1,000 votes would determine who becomes premier of a certain province, for instance.
Precisely, and that's why we are where we are today, because that actually did happen. I mean, like, the governing party actually did bus people into a particular area in a certain by-election, and that's why the problem arose. And I think it's going to be important next year. I mean, we are getting to a point where electoral contestation is very tight now, and where there was a large gap, maybe people didn't bother. Yes, the ANC is going to be in charge anyway. We know, I mean, it's a question of margins. But now it's no longer the case. We saw what happened in 2016 in the municipalities, in the metros, where power actually did change hands. And in 2019, there are indications that that power may change hands in some provinces, or may be very close. And it's very critical. You don't want a situation that arises in some African countries where elections are contested.
Especially in this age of of coalition governance. Thank you guys so much, Mike, as well as Mondli Makanya and Lawrence de Klerk. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. And the Constitutional Court will be delivering that judgment probably before November. The judgment has been deferred, and we'll wait for the Constitutional Court to see what it says would be a remedy to this defect. Let's go to a quick ad break.